Hello, my name is Horama, and today I have found 4 very disturbing stories from the No Sleep subreddit and will be narrating them here. But before we begin, I did want to ask that if you end up enjoying my narrations, then please do consider liking and subscribing, as that really does help the channel a lot. But either way, without any further ado, let's get into the narrations. The first story has been posted by user Jim Wade 420. Forests really are strange, aren't they? Miles and miles of trees. Sometimes so secluded you feel like you may be the only person on Earth while in one. Easy to get lost in. Forests creep a lot of people out, myself included. However, about a week ago, I discovered something that I never could have imagined deep in the woods behind my house. I live on a 7.5-acre plot of land in front of a massive forest that goes on for miles. Something quite common for northern Michigan. Though I've lived here for a while, I haven't gone very far into the woods. As someone that grew up in a large town, I've found forests to be rather unsettling. The property I live on is only a few miles from the nearest town, but the town is very small, and in Michigan, the change from an urban environment to the wilderness can happen quite fast. The forest behind my house generally consists of evergreen trees and the occasional plot of hardwood trees. For a ways, the forest isn't very secluded. However, beyond where my property ends, roughly at the power lines, it becomes very deep, very broad, and you feel hundreds of miles from civilization, although you are only about 3 miles from town and less than a mile from other people's houses. I decided to go as far as I could into the forest and figured that I may see something interesting. It was 10 a.m., and I figured that I could spend a day in the wilderness, something I rarely ever do. I grabbed my pack of cigarettes, a lighter, my phone, a flashlight, and a candy bar. I'm not exactly an outdoorsman, so I was a bit nervous. There are bobcats and bears in the area, and I kind of just hoped that I wouldn't come across one. I was not expecting to find what I did, however, and the idea that it was there, a few miles behind my house, deep in the woods, makes me shudder at the thought of it. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. As I exited my house, I realized that it was a bit cold and windy. I shrugged it off and began walking back. It was a cloudy, dreary day, and the bleak, grayish overtone the environment had really didn't make me any more comfortable with wandering into a massive forest. But yet, I pressed on. Within a few minutes, I had finally entered the woods. It was rather dark thanks to the damp trees and the overcast skies, and the wind was not as harsh, but it was still loud and caused the branches of all the trees to sway. And yes, I know, it seems like I was being way too paranoid about a freaking forest, and at the time, I thought the same. But now, I know it was some kind of warning. My instincts knew there was something back in those woods that I didn't want to see, but at the time, I figured it was just paranoia. After about 10 minutes or so of making my way through a meadow of trees, bushes, logs, and ferns, I finally made it to the power lines. I stopped and lit a cigarette. In both directions, the power lines turned back towards the road, only letting me see a couple 100 yards in each direction. Behind me was my property, my forest, somewhat dense but familiar, and in front of me was an extremely dense forest, much darker and more unknown than the 5 acres I had just traversed to get to where I was. I smoked the rest of my cigarette and pressed on. I continued my walk for about an hour and a half before spotting something entirely unexpected. Deep in the forest, miles from anything, surrounded by trees so thick it looked like it could be 7 in the evening, was a house. A very old house. I stopped and stared at it. "Oh, come on," I yelled, hoping any nearby animals would know I was there and go away. The sight of the house filled me with dread. It was very old, run down and covered in moss. All the windows appeared broken, and the front door was gone. I felt a sense of anxiety just looking at it, but figured that there's no way anyone lives here. I worked myself up to go inside and grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. The house appeared to be from the early 50s and had only a downstairs floor and apparently a basement. Upon entering, I was overwhelmed by the smell of mold, mildew, must, and dirt. The walls and floors were mossy or moldy. I looked round. I was in a living room. There was a disgusting, moldy couch, a broken coffee table, and a very old, moldy, cracked TV from the 50s. I was fascinated. Everything was rotted and moldy, and the smell was just overwhelming. I walked into the next room, and it was a kitchen. This is where things got weird. The counters were cluttered with what looked like dirty dishes, with remnants of what was once food on them. The fridge was an old 50s style rounded fridge that was dark yellow and caked in dust. The broken kitchen window let some light into the room and aired the room out a little bit. I looked at the kitchen table. Plates with half-century-old, rotten remnants of food were sitting on the table, as if the residents would return any time to finish their meals. I was completely freaked out at this point. I looked through the cupboards. They were filled with non-perishable canned foods that were very faded and hard to read. There were some jars that I'm assuming held food in the past, but the food was black and nasty now. I opened the fridge, and it was filled with nasty, maggot-ridden food and some very old beer. I slammed it shut, and the fridge door broke off. I was a bit creeped out, but fascinated at the same time. I checked out the next area, past the kitchen. It was a hallway, in the same state of disrepair as the rest of the house. There were 3 doors in the hallway. One of them was locked, and it appeared to be the basement, since there were a couple of steps leading down to the door. It had several locks, and I decided that there was no way in hell I was going down there. I proceeded to the next doorway. the bathroom. It was a standard 50s bathroom, but rotted to all hell with 50-year-old rotted toilet paper next to the smashed up moldy toilet. The mirror was broken, and the bathtub was filthy and rusted. I left the bathroom and proceeded to the next room. It was a bedroom and was rotted, much like the other rooms. There were two small beds and a bunch of very old, moldy stuffed animals in one corner, and a rusted toy car in the other. There was an old beat-up dresser against the wall in between the toys, and a small broken window in between the beds. I walked up to the closet and looked inside. It was filled with old boxes and some rotted old clothes. I left the room and proceeded to the next and final room. As I opened the door, it fell out of the doorway and broke in half on the floor. I shined my light into the room, and I could only see a rotted vanity with brown blotchy stains on the broken mirror. I got a sense of dread, but moved on into the room. I turned and looked at the bed, and my heart jumped, and I screamed out loud. There was a human skeleton on the bed. The clothes were torn, and the skull was completely smashed into pieces, and I saw a gun on the floor nearby. And then I looked at the closet. In front of the closet were two smaller skeletons with equally ripped clothes and smashed skulls. I was absolutely terrified, but I just had to see what was in the closet. I walked over and looked in, and it was terrifying. It was another skeleton. It was broken in half and appeared that the person had hanged themselves. Their clothes were rotted, and the skeleton had broken off at the bottom of the vertebrae. His hip bone and leg bones were on the floor below him. I was petrified with fear and managed to go back out of the room. I turned and was about to run out of the house when I heard a banging at the basement door. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I was petrified with fear once again. Then I heard a man's voice scream in my ear to get out of the house. I jumped and then ran out of the house, nearly tripping several times. I turned around and looked and saw a vague silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. I had enough. I sprinted faster than I ever did in my life and kept sprinting until I got back to my house. I opened the door and slammed it shut, locked it, and collapsed. I sat on the floor in front of my door for 10 minutes before getting up and sitting on the couch. I was freaked out and decided to watch some TV to calm myself. I decided that I was never going past the power lines ever again, if I ever even go that far back, which I haven't. I was tempted to call the police, but I decided not to. I hate the cops, and I do not want them meddling in my business and asking me what I was doing and telling me I was trespassing. It was obvious. The apparent murder-suicide happened decades ago, and I figured I'd leave it be. As I sit here typing this, I can't help but think that just a few miles away, deep in the woods, is a place where a horrendous crime took place decades ago, and that no one in this area is aware that it even exists. I have always believed in ghosts to some extent, but now I'm positive they exist. A thought just hit me. Why was there knocking from the basement if the skeletons were in the bedroom? The second story has been posted by user Worcester_ST. A few days ago, my little brother Rob and I set out on a multi-day hiking trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We are both pretty accomplished outdoorsmen and brought only what we could carry on our backs. We purposefully set off to avoid established trails, hoping to discover some place that no one had ever explored before. The first 2 days were beautiful. We walked through trees, crossed some small streams, and took some great pictures. The temperature was unseasonably warm, so much so that we often took off our sweaters to not overheat. It was the third day that the strangeness started. As we climbed a ridge, Rob noticed that some of the dirt had been eroded away, leaving stone. Somebody had clearly carved stairs into the stone. We followed them as we climbed. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know that there are several telltale signs of human activity. Trash, campfires, and that sort of thing. We hadn't seen any of them up to this point, so seeing stairs excited and confused us. How old were they? Were they carved by the Native Americans? The stone path continued deeper into the woods. We didn't have a better plan, so we decided to see where it led. At times, it was hard to keep track of, but after some searching, we would always pick it up again. Later that night, we set up our tent, and I stepped outside to look at the stars. They were not the same stars that I'd seen the past 2 nights. Now, I know many of you may be asking what I mean. After all, most people can only identify the Big Dipper or Orion's Belt at most. Not me though. I'm studying astronomy in college right now. My on-campus job is to align telescopes to the right spot in the right constellations. So, when I tell you the stars were not right, I know what I'm talking about. There were stars, for sure, just not any constellations I recognized. And that's what unsettled me the most. I returned to the campsite to tell Bob, but he cut me off. Does it smell strange to you? He asked. It did. I couldn't explain it very well, but the air smelled off. They say that smell activates memories more than any other sense, and this one was powerful. It reminded me of a cave I'd nearly been trapped in as a teenager. It reminded me of the car accident I'd seen a year back. I don't mean to say it actually smelled like any of those things, just that it reminded me of them somehow. We went to bed feeling uneasy, to say the least. Our compass still worked, and I told myself I might have missed constellations due to overworking myself. I knew that wasn't true, but it's the only thing that could put me to sleep that night. The next day, we set out again, determined to get through this strange part of the forest. The sense of disorientation from the night before got worse and worse though. If we weren't staring directly at our compasses, we found ourselves lost in the woods, forced to hack our way back onto the stone path. The forest grew thick and muggy, and the trail led us into a steep valley. We were forced to continue forward. I kept seeing something in the woods out of the corner of my eye. Rob reported seeing the same thing. The forest was dark though, despite it being near midday. We started switching off which one of us was the guide, but the forest was so thick that it was hard to keep an eye on our compasses for long. "Dude," Rob said in front of me. I paused, following his gaze. He was staring straight up at a tree. 3 squirrels were hanging from it, each with trails of blood soaking the tree beneath them. A symbol was carved above them that I did not recognize. We stared at it for a long time, not sure of what exactly to do. The squirrels could not have been more than a few days old. We talked about it and made the decision to push on ahead. We were almost through the park, and we'd come across a road if we made it through to the other side. We might not have made that decision if we knew we'd pass a dozen more trees just like that one along the stone trail. Some trees were strung up with squirrels, but we saw raccoons, bunnies, even the remains of a deer rotting on a tree. We tried to not look at them and instead pressed on with more speed. We were pausing to drink some water when I heard a low, croaking sound from behind us. I turned and for the first time saw the black figure. It was a woman, crouched down in the underbrush. She was staring at the two of us. My entire body screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. The smell from earlier was thick and heavy in the air. I swapped my phone to the camera and took a picture, not daring to move. The snap of my phone was enough to break us out of our trance, and we took off running. We followed the stone trail back the way we'd come, not slowing down until we were puffing for air. We looked around, but did not see her. When we'd caught our breath a little, we continued, not stopping until we'd passed the first stone steps on the ridge late that night. I'm not sure what we saw or what it was. If anyone has heard about an entity like this in the forest, please let us know. I'm scared. It's been a few days, and I can still smell it. This was indeed a very creepy story, and luckily the original poster had included a picture, that being the one on the screen right now. The third story has been posted by user Groundball Double Play. There are lots of rumors out there about skinwalkers. Maybe I don't believe them. Maybe I think that coming from a different tribe makes me immune to their evil. Regardless of what I believe, there are things I have seen in the lonely places of Arizona that I cannot even begin to explain. The business of my family often takes us deep into the Navajo reservation and lends us to spending the night in a hotel or at a friend's place. However superstitious or practical you are, There can be no arguments that those desolate desert roads are not always safe for travelers and locals alike after the sun sets. I know many people who have had dangerous encounters there. On a trip to visit a relative near Canyon del Shelly, we decided to attend an evening rug auction. They were beautiful, by the way. That took us a couple hours out of town. I was riding with my friend, Jenny, whose mother we were visiting. I would like to make note that Jenny is not the most stalwart of souls and is one of the more superstitious Indians I know. On previous driving excursions, she has begged me to stop the car and take a different route after noticing an owl flying towards the road. I didn't stop. Owls are generally good luck for my people, and in any case, I don't put much stock in omens. Anyhow, the auction had ended by 9 p.m. or so, and Jenny and I were getting antsy. We opted to head back to her mother's place early and let the rest of the family catch up with us. As Jenny drove the two of us home on the empty two-lane road, we quickly left all semblance of civilization behind for sheer night, which seemed even darker in the shadow of the canyons. Jenny had settled on the least fuzzy FM station she could find, and I was staring aimlessly out of the window. That's when I noticed the dog. At first, it was just a flash of white in the corner of my vision, and then I craned my neck to get a good look. A big, white German Shepherd was running parallel to our car about 100 yards off the road and a little ways behind us. Something about this animal just made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I knew we must have been going 40 or even 45 miles per hour, but it was gaining on us. I could feel my heart rate pick up while I stared at it. As it came perpendicular to us, it began to draw up off of its front feet until it was running on two legs like a human. When it turned its head to look at me, my stomach dropped. Even from that distance, I was sure I could see a red glint to its eyes, and a feeling of dread washed over me. I must have made a noise because Jenny touched my leg and asked what was wrong. I glanced at her wordlessly and then gestured out the window. But as I turned back, the dog was gone. Not wanting to scare her, I told her the dark was playing tricks on me, and I closed my eyes, determined to sleep the rest of the way home. Next night, after a lot of food and even more visiting, I had holed up in my room to get ready for bed. I was staying in the second floor of the house, and my window overlooked the street. The houses are fairly spread out, but the road is lined with street lamps, the nearest of which is less than a block away on the opposite side. I turned off my light and went to the window to pull down the shades so the light from the outside wouldn't keep me up. Fear hit me like a sucker punch when my eyes drifted across the road. There, in the light of the street lamp, was the German Shepherd. It was standing on its hind legs in a way that I knew canine anatomy should not allow, and it was staring straight back at me. From that close, it was obvious that it had deep red eyes and fur that was a yellowish white color. I don't know how long we watched each other. I knew better than to stare it in the eyes, but I was too terrified to turn away. Finally, it dropped down to all fours and walked away. I slept with a knife next to my bed, and the bedroom door locked that night. Some part of me thinks it was a skinwalker that I saw, a witch out hunting for trouble. I haven't been back to Canyon del Chelly since. The fourth story has been posted by user Gista. My dad owns a house in a tiny town in South Texas. It's where his grandparents lived. The garage is a separate little building with an apartment above it. The next house over was torn down in the 90s, and the church was a few blocks away and was burned down by an arsonist in the late 90s. All growing up, the stairs up to the garage apartment were rotting out, and we were told never to go up there. One time I snuck up there and found something that looked like a small human organ in a body jar. My dad said that it was his tonsils and that they'd been there since he was a kid. Whenever we'd go hunting, the deer that were shot would be skinned, and then their corpses would be hung up behind that building by the sinews of their legs from the branches of a large tree. In the early 2000s, we were down there on another hunting trip. When we arrived, I walked back behind that garage and stood there. A noise made the hair raise on my neck. Suddenly, I was startled by the sound of a very large creature above me to my left. I quickly turned as a giant owl flew out and had trouble navigating under the tree, kicking up plenty of dust as it flapped its huge wings. I tried to follow it with my camera, but it vanished. My friend had recently gotten into EVP. I had a nice new video camera. We had to wake up early to hunt, around 4:30 a.m., well before dawn. I woke up before everyone else, so I grabbed my video camera and crept up those stairs to the garage apartment, pausing and saying, "Hello, is anyone there?" Then leaving a few seconds of silence before advancing and trying again. I heard nothing, so I went back inside. The next night, I was sleeping in the master bedroom in my great-grandmother's old bed, alone. I had a terrifying dream in which an entity, which in the dream I believed to be the devil himself, was chasing after me, wanting to know my name so that he could find me and steal my soul. I refused to tell my name and kept running, but he was able to change the entire landscape of the dream around me, at once making it into a plane crash, then a shopping mall, then a school dance at my college, where the entity seemed to take the form of a woman to seduce me. Then I awoke sharply in the bed, staring at the ceiling, and I had a distinct sense that someone or something was standing right in the doorway, not moving. I closed my eyes and pretended to still be asleep, trying as hard as I could not to move. I don't know how long this was all happening for, but the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. I went back and reviewed the EVP tape, and what distinctly sounds like human footsteps could be heard on the recording, which I still have somewhere, probably. I went back to the garage apartment and cautiously climbed the broken stairs as high as I could, and reaching up, filmed the inside so that I could see what's up there. It was full of the bones and skeletons of various small critters, which I assumed was the owl's work. Could the footsteps have been the owl? I went back and listened over and over, and it just does not sound like the sound of an owl against boards. It's a pair of two-part sounds that sound exactly like someone wearing boots with heels walking, where when the heel touches, it makes a louder and more distinct sound than when the front part of the foot touches. The sound does not sound like what I imagine a bird or even a large owl might sound like if it was walking. I'm no biologist, and I have no idea what owls sound like walking around in an attic, but I've heard raccoons and other critters with smallish feet moving, and they do not sound anything like human footsteps. Whatever made that sound had to be fairly massive, and owls never exceed 5 pounds. Maybe it was a dying jackrabbit flopping around with its final energy, but the sounds were far too uniform to be something in its last throes, and no breathing, gurgling, or crying sound could be heard, as you might expect from a creature near death. Years later, I had forgotten about all of this when I was at my grandmother's house. She's the daughter of the people who owned that house in South Texas, and she lived there for a while. My dad showed me a history book that former residents of that town had compiled, and my grandmother had a chapter in it. Now, let me tell you, my grandmother and grandfather are extremely devout Christians. As a result, my aunts, uncles, and cousins are all so Christian that they were not allowed to watch cartoons like Ghostbusters because Christians don't believe in ghosts. My grandmother would be the last person in the world that I'd expect to believe in a supernatural explanation for anything unless it involved Jesus or angels. Yet, my grandmother's chapter in the one and only history book about that town explains how the house on the next lot over, the one that was torn down, had been haunted. I don't remember the details of her chapter, but I could get a copy if those details might be relevant. When I told this story to a friend, it was suggested to me that this could have been some kind of shapeshifter or some kind of other mythological creature. Indeed, owls are one of the main things they're said to be able to become, but I have no idea what else to think. Also, I wasn't going to post the name of the town because it did not seem relevant, and I don't like putting specifics online because weirdos might try to find the house or something. However, what I just learned is, honestly, quite crazy. I swear that I did not know this before writing this post, but I guess it doesn't really matter. You'll just have to take my word for it. So, I wanted to see if my dad or anyone has put that history book online, which has my grandmother's chapter in it. So I googled the history of Katrina, Texas. When I googled it, the top result calls it a ghost town and tells the story of a ghost encounter at the Old Towns Hotel. Further, it seems the town got its name from a woman named Katerina who was killed there in the 1800s. And also, here's some additional information that I was able to find online. There are several stories as to how Katerina got its name. One of the most prominent is that on the old Sinton Ranch, everyone was out except the cook, whose name was Katerina. While everyone was away, a band of Comanche came and killed her and burned down the camp. The ranch headquarters were rebuilt on the same site, and quite often it is said that her ghost could be heard singing as she flew around the place. Another of the more prominent stories of the origins of the town was for a Hispanic goat herd who was found dead on the ranch in 1913. Others claim that it was a famous Indian named Katerina. Whatever the truth, all agree that someone died there. I note that Juan Agustin Morphy's journal in 1778 refers to a body of water as Catarina, and missionaries often name things after Santa Catarina, so I doubt the name came from a woman named Catarina who died. And as this site indicates, there are competing stories as to how it got its name, not all of which involve someone dying. However the name arose, the fact remains that ghost sightings are associated with the area, something I was previously unaware of. The unknown. It exists all around us. No matter where you go, the unknown will never be too far behind. While writing the script for these narrations, I began to think about just how much humanity really knows about this world. Some people seem to have the foolish idea that we have already discovered all that has any meaning on this world, but I simply refuse to believe that. Would that not be a boring existence? Knowing all there is would destroy the wondrous feeling of discovery. I would simply hate such a world. But either way, I do hope you enjoyed my narrations, and even if you didn't, I want to wish you a good rest of your day.